Hi, I'm Debbie with Nixene Publishing, and we have guest host today, which is Steve Rodgers. He's with Sampy and also is the CTO of Emergentek. Our guest today is Matthew Dahm, who works for the CDC and is part of NIOSH, which we're going to have a chance to get to know a little bit about in this interview. And the purpose of this is to highlight the fact that Matthew's speaking at the Graphene Leadership Summit coming up in November. So welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Well, it's good to be here. Thank you for having me.
All right. Now, Steve, go ahead and take it away.
Well, Matt, how long have you been with NIOSH now?
So this December will actually be 11 years. So it's gone a lot faster than it sounds.
Yeah, I guess.
So, all right. So now I want to know, and so do lots of people who are watching, what is NIOSH a regulatory agency?
Yeah, that's a good question, and one we get a lot. So NIOSH, for those who don't know, is the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. And no, we are not a regulatory agency. We are actually a research institute that focuses on occupational safety and health, and we are located within the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. So I think most people commonly get us confused with OSHA, which is the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, and that is an enforcement and regulatory agency, and they are located within the Department of Labor.
So do you establish the rules and OSHA enforces them?
No, so what NIOSH actually does is we develop the research that goes behind some of the regulation that OSHA will enforce.
Can you give us an example of a NIOSH program that supports industry in that way?
Yeah, so NIOSH actually has a lot of different programs that will definitely support industry, but it is important to know that we are an independent research institute, but we regularly work alongside and collaborate with many different industries, depending on the research that we're doing. So specific for nanomaterials, NIOSH actually has a program called the Nanotechnology Research Center, which is a consortium of toxicologists, industrial hygienists, aerosol scientists, and engineers all across the research institute that conduct a wide range of nanotechnology research.
So what would you say would be the most important aspect of graphene to monitor?
So that's a tough question to answer, and that's one actually that we're hoping to answer with a study that I'm going to talk a little bit more on the 12th when I present. So, I mean, for nanomaterials in general, there's been a big push from the outset to use a couple different exposure metrics. Most namely, I would say surface area and particle number. And those were really being pushed by the toxicologist because they were most related to health effects, associated with health effects after exposure. Unfortunately, these metrics they're not very practical for use in the field for actually monitoring workplace exposures. They're not really easy or reliable metrics, and they're what I call non-specific. So you can't differentiate, a nuisance dust from, let's say, graphene. But fortunately for graphene, there's actually been quite a bit of exposure data on other types of carbonaceous nanomaterials, most namely carbon nanotubes. That has mainly shown that monitoring for airborne elemental carbon mass is a very good marker for exposure. It's fairly specific, it's sensitive, which is very important for sampling nanomaterials that have low densities like graphene.
There seems to be a tendency in people's minds to kind of lump all nanomaterials together in terms of health and safety exposure. Is there an intrinsic risk with nanomaterials? Are they different? Are carbon nanotubes and graphene similar? How do you break that all down?
Yeah, and that's a tough question to answer, right? But I mean, so the way I think of it is, one of the guiding principles of toxicology is the dose makes the poison. So it's how much you're being exposed to dictates what health effects are going to be associated with it. So, for example, I mean, a person can drink too much water and they can potentially die from that. So there's inherent risk with every chemical that we handle. So I guess the question that we should be asking, though, is, are there health effects associated with levels of exposure that current workers are being exposed to in the United States? And that's really the question that my study is trying to answer is, what are those realistic workplace exposures that people are currently being exposed to? And that, answering those questions first will lead to more realistic toxicology studies, will give us more, be able to pinpoint a better answer for, what health effects are associated with graphene exposure, if any. And as far as for carbon nanotubes compared to graphene, I think a lot of the early toxicology studies have been pretty positive for graphene, showing that it's a little bit more benign than obviously exposure to carbon nanotubes, which is a very big positive.
That's a good thing. It's easy to overly simplify these things when you're dealing in the nano realm, isn't it?
Yes, very much so.
See those little things sticking out on the side of the graphene, and you think, oh, it's got little saw teeth on it. Actually, that's just open covalent bonds, right?
Yep.
So how has graphene surprised you?
I think the thing that's been most surprising to me is, the relatively short time from discovery to widespread use within manufacturing. So we've only been doing our study for a little over a year, and we've only visited 4 companies. But the thing that I've been really amazed with is the scale that they're already manufacturing at, and the quantities that they're using. It's not something that I completely expected, for a material that's really only been discovered for about 15 years. So that's been very impressive to me.
Can you divulge what kind of scale you're looking at there?
So, I mean, when I talk about scale, I'm looking more at, is it a pilot plant? Are they just implementing an idea and trying to scale it? Or is it a research and development type facility? Or are they actually, mainstream manufacturing? And I can pull from some of the previous studies that I've done on carbon nanotubes, and it took, quite a while to really get to what I would consider mainstream manufacturing. And I feel like graphene has gotten there a lot faster. And I think part of that reason is because they've been able to, take the lessons of the past for other different types of nanomaterials and apply that to graphene to get there a little bit faster.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think there were a lot of painful lessons involved in carbon nanotubes, and the graphene people have been able to pick up on some of the bottom line results as a result of that.
Yeah, it's kind of like James Baker over at the Geek in Manchester talks about, getting in, failing fast, moving on to the next lesson, so that you can advance the material.
Yep. Hey, Matt, you're a featured speaker in our Sampy Graphene Leadership Summit. With all of the interest in graphene, how do you think this summit will provide a special benefit to its attendees?
Yeah, so I saw the list of speakers, and there's obviously a lot of very smart people with a very wide amount of knowledge in the graphene industry, and I'm just excited to be a part of that. I'm hoping one of the main takeaways that people can gain from my talk is that occupational safety is a concept that needs to be instilled in your workplace from the top down.
Mhm.
And even though that graphene is considered a relatively new and emerging material, we can apply some of those lessons learned from other chemicals and other nanomaterials so that we can handle graphene in a very relatively safe manner.
So, Matt, now what do you find most satisfying about the role that you get to play in this new graphene industry?
Yeah, so I think the most satisfying thing for me is the fact that hopefully someday the research that we're working on now at NIOSH can be used to provide information to the industry regarding best practices. How to control exposures. What do we need to be concerned of? What are certain processes that people might see the highest exposures in, and then how can we control them? So I think that's one benefit that we get to see by visiting a lot of different companies is what are those best practices, and hopefully how we can disseminate that information to the industry as a whole. But really, I think our research can have a lasting impact on worker safety and health, and the graphene industry would be the most satisfying thing for me.
Thank you so much for your time, Matt. And Steve, thanks for co-hosting with me so that we can let people know about the Graphene Leadership Summit. Appreciate your time, guys. Thanks so much.